Welcome to AgriMinds, the podcast where we explore the intersections of personal growth and professional success in the ag industry. I'm Kacee, your host. Thank you for joining me as we dive in to the different strategies and insights that will help you level up your life and career. From mental health to leadership development, we're going to cover it all. So sit back and get ready to grow with AgriMinds. Welcome to the AgriMinds Podcast. I have Dustin Toberman with me today. We are talking all things leadership or lack thereof and company culture. Welcome to the AgriMinds Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Kacee. I got to be honest. I will follow you and I follow the show. And when I see the guests, I feel like it's a pretty like who's who in ag. I'm honored to be here, but I feel like I got a little pressure to like carry the torch to the next level.
No, don't even think that at all. I've had some really cool people on the AgriMinds podcast, but I would also say, like, not to diminish or devalue any of my guests, but I've had just like regular folks on here that didn't hold any kind of high position in any kind of company. They weren't, any of these showy influencers. They were just like your everyday average Joes too. And I think that some of those interviews have been most impactful. And so I think I'm honored to have you on the podcast too. We met on LinkedIn. I say this on every episode, like we met, a while back, but we did. And I don't even really remember how it got started or who started it, but I just remember us connecting and me and you connecting right away and saying, we have so many things in common, and our journeys have kind of been similar, where we were in corporate America for years and years and years, kind of had that, turnover of, I just don't feel super fulfilled here. So I'm going to go try something else. We became business owners, and now we're looking back and saying, how can we take what we've learned and help other people? And so if somebody doesn't know who you are, would you share what you do and who you help?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously Dustin Toberman, but I'm the founder of Omni Ag Consulting, and our focus at Omni is really on connecting talent and opportunity in the ag space. And so while recruiting is a part of what we do, working with both candidates and clients, from the agribusiness world, also work with clients on their own recruiting and retention programs. As we're going to get into a little bit, clearly we can see there's an issue right now with companies out there, and there's a lot of disconnection, I think, between the candidates and companies. And I think that how we look at recruiting and retention as well, those are things that we're almost at a crossroads, and I think we need to take a serious look at that, and it's time to make some changes if we want to continue to attract the top talent. And that's really where our focus is. But at the core of it all, it's about helping people, and that's why I got into this. I spent the bulk of my career in the corporate world, working for a couple of the largest agribusinesses in the world. And when I had the opportunity, things changed in our situation. I had the opportunity to break off and start my own company. I asked myself, what is it that I wanted to do? And as I looked back at my own career, and I thought, ag has been so good to me. I grew up in an ag family. I started working at our family grain elevators in Southern Illinois, when I was just a young kid, and probing trucks with a hand probe and a Folgers can, and getting real dirty, climbing, sacks at our feed store. But I wanted to help give back. And so my whole goal was to try to connect people to where they wanted to be in the ag industry. And that's really what we do at our core. So, whether we're working directly with an organization to provide them with candidates, or just trying to help a candidate, maybe interview prep, or particularly young students get ready for a career fair, it's all about helping people in the end. And I think as long as you've got that, kind of as your core belief, I think that you'll always be successful.
Yeah. And I think you hit on something really cool where you said, there is some turnover and there is some resistance to change in certain ways, whether it's known or unknown. And so I just want to dive into that a little bit further, because, what's causing the turnover? What's causing people to be picky about the jobs that they're applying for? Like I heard this the other day, and someone said, I had this guy reach out to me. They're in their senior year of college and they're expecting like $70,000, $80,000 right out the gate. And the old me would have been like, dream on. There's no way that, one, you're going to find that, or two, you deserve that. And then the new me, though, if I'm completely honest with you, why the heck not ask for that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Why the heck not? And I challenge this, because why why does someone have to right out of the gate scrape from the bottom? I it just drives me insane. Like if I look back to the leadership that I had right out of the gate, I was doing the grunt work. I was doing the stuff that nobody else wanted to do, and I was making the least amount of money. And they're like, "Oh, it builds character, your work ethic, and
Of
you're
course.
getting, you're learning all the ins and outs of the business." And I'm like, "Bull crap. No wonder nobody sticks around after a year." I thought I had to, work for that John Deere dealership for several years to get myself quote unquote qualified.
Sure.
And 3 years after I was there, I had the guts to apply for a corporate job at John Deere, where I went from making $14 an hour to making $84,000 a year
Wow.
at the age of 23.
Yeah.
So don't tell me it's not possible.
Yeah, you're
Don't tell me
absolutely
it's not
right. Yeah,
possible.
you're absolutely right, and that's something that we talk about a lot with the younger people that we work with is that it's all out there waiting for you. But the world, I'm a big believer in this. The world belongs to those who ask for it, and so it's about your mindset. And that's one
Yes.
of the things that we work with a lot of young candidates. And I made this mistake too when I got out of school. I knew, okay, well, I'm an ag guy. I grew up in an ag family. I'm always going to be an ag guy, and so now I'm going to go do ag things. Well, the problem was I didn't really have a plan. I didn't think about, well, what does that mean? What does it look like? And so one of the first things we do with candidates is before we just worry about a job description and am I qualified? How much money am I going to make? Where am I going to go? One of the first things I'd like to do is ask them to think about themselves. What is it exactly that you're looking for? Is money the most important thing? Do you want to travel? Do you want to see the world? Is it about gaining experience? Because unless you can answer these questions, when the company that you're interviewing with throws them out at you, how are you going to know what you want to do and where you want to
Mhm.
be? And so maybe it's all about just gathering information and you want to climb. Okay, well, that might be a different path. You might take a different position than you would if, living in a certain location was more important to you. So I think that's so important. What you said is that it's all out there, but you've got to give it some thought. You've got to do your due diligence and you've got to be your own advocate like you were.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think where we can, as professionals in the industry now, that we have an influence on this next generation, what we can do is set realistic expectations and say, yeah, it is possible for you to make almost six figures or plus that, depending on your role, right out of the gate. Absolutely. But if you're not super intentional, yeah, it doesn't matter how much money you make. I mean, listen, I was making almost six figures and I was miserable.
Right.
I hated it. Left that job, took a job that was way less money not because I was miserable because of the job. I was miserable because of the season of life that I was in. Because I was a brand new mom. I got pregnant 9 months into working at this job. So I went from making $14 an hour to $84,000 an hour or a year. And 9 months later, found out I was pregnant.
Mm.
And I was living in a state 5.5 hours from my friends or family. I knew no one, and I traveled for a living. And my husband and I were not married at the time. We did things very backwards, and I was freaking out. And so it doesn't
I
matter
can
how
imagine.
much money you make. If it doesn't align with one, your skills, you'll get burnt out soon, or two, the season of life that you're in. And so the thing that we can do to help other people is to set those realistic expectations and say, okay, awesome. It's great to make this much money. This season of life works for you. Everything's aligned. Wonderful. But what I also wish is I had somebody in my life that would shoot it to me straight and say, you're not jeopardizing your career by leaving this job to be home and be a mom.
Mm.
You're not
Yeah.
jeopardizing it. And I thought I had completely lost a career because I decided to leave John Deere. But had I not had leaders in my life to say, take a year or two, figure your life out, and then you can come back.
Yeah.
And it took me about 6 years to get back up to six figures in my career, but I was also home with my children. And so, that's one thing. But I think one, knowing that the opportunity is there, and two, you have the ability to design and create and be really intentional with your career. And it all starts with having those leaders in our life.
I'm a huge believer that everyone needs a career champion. And so I would encourage anyone out there, whether you're young or you've been in the game for a while, if you haven't found that person, seek them out because I know that I would not be where I am today had it not been for some great career champions that I found along the way. And I
How do
think
you find one? How do you
I,
find a mentor?
I think it's all about engagement and communication and what you just said. I mean, that literally, if I could lump this whole episode into one word, it's communication. Because if you were to ask me, okay, well, what do I think is wrong with the hiring process, the recruiting process, the retention process? It's communication. Where do I think that leaders go wrong with their team? Like, for example, I dealt with a lot of young traders and merchandisers being on the commercial side of the ag business. It's not in the formula. It's not the buying of the grain or selling of the grain. It's typically where we see young leaders get off the rails is in their communication with their own teams. And then that undermines their authority. So I believe that the whole breakdown of most of our problems start with the communication. And you mentioned earlier about one of your managers who is not a good communicator. When I think about the positive influences in my career and versus the negative, and if I were to put them on my whiteboard, and I started to go through all the characteristics, I will guarantee, and anybody else can do this out there, you are going to see that you are going to have good communication with those that you view as a positive influence. And that's the way it is. And I'll even fast forward, like we're going to go to the last page of a great book here, that for those teams that are struggling, and if you're a leader, whether you're the CEO or a mid-level manager, even a manager of, a small crew, effective communication and showing people that you listen is the best way to bring around any kind of change. And I think that's really where culture comes from. We often get caught up in this when I'm working with clients. I like to ask, and I know what kind of answer I'm going to get because I did the same thing. But when you go and you speak to someone, you ask them, what are our core values and what are we all about? And, you're going to hear things like, well, a lot of people won't answer because they don't know, but then you're going to say, well, they remember the plaque on the wall and in the lobby, and it's going to say like integrity, customer service,
Blah,
honesty,
blah,
and
blah.
right, exactly, right. And we all walk by those kind of plaques every day in the office, and most of us can't tell you what they say because we kind of laugh it off. And that's and some people say, well, that's culture. That's not culture. Culture, what's happening between the lines. It's in the fine print, right? And so when you're looking at building culture, it's all about communication. How do people perceive their experiences as a whole? And that's where the culture comes from. So a lot to unpack there. But getting back to one of your other questions about, where do we go wrong in the whole interview process from the beginning? And I think this is something that I always did myself. And the more I get out there and I work with clients on it, I see that it's absolutely true. One of the things that I think we're so guilty of is sticking to that resume. And all we want to do is ask these canned questions. For example, you look and you see that, when Kacee was 16, she was a lifeguard, and so we want to talk about that. Well, what was it like being a lifeguard there? And the problem with that is that after all this is said and done, we typically have, 35, 45 minutes in an interview, and we leave, and all I know is about your experience as an intern or as a lifeguard, right? And how am I ever going to tie that into success with my organization? How am I ever going to know if you're a culture fit? And so I think the first thing I would recommend for leaders to do at the recruiting process and the interview process is to get off of that and to stop thinking about it, in terms of a checklist, like an automobile. We have to go down and, are the tires full? Do I have gas? Get to know the individual. And what I used to do a lot of times is flip over the resume when I would interview people because I want to disarm them and go, listen, we could talk a little bit about the resume, but I need to get to know you. And so I want to ask the kind of questions to know how you handle certain situations. I'm looking for a certain set of characteristics. They're going to tell me if I find you to be a good fit to my team. If you're already interviewing for the job, there's a pretty good chance that I think you can handle it based on your resume. You've probably done the day-to-day, but that's not what I'm really looking for. When we're looking for people that we want to build, our organizations with and find true culture fits, we've got to go beyond the resume. So the first thing I would say is get off that and really stop to get to know people. And there's a whole series of questions, that we go through with people to help them work on this. But there's nothing more frustrating than leaving, the small allotted time you have with a candidate and you not feeling like you're any closer to knowing them. And I can tell you on the flip side of that, they feel the same way. And as we talked about earlier with this war on talent, they are making a decision on you just like you are on them. And when they leave, I can tell you because they call me and they say that was the worst interview ever. All they did was ask me, questions based on my resume. Clearly, they didn't really want to get to know me. That candidate is making up their mind whether or not they want to come back for round two. And so for the organizations that are going to lead and continue to hire the top talent, you've got to go beyond, because if they don't feel like they make that connection with you, they're going to move on. There's too many options for them to choose from.
Oh my gosh. Our generation, well, okay, I would say the generation of like mid 30s and younger have a much different expectation of what their work-life balance looks like.
No doubt.
And if they're having a bad experience in the workplace, most likely due to poor management or poor leadership, they're going to move on. Or they're
Yes.
going to go start their own business. I mean, like that's like the common theme here.
Yes.
And I think if we go even further back and start at the hiring process, that is where we can set our business up for success. We can
Yeah.
make sure that we have that retention. We can make sure that, you know, we're feeling fulfilled and can sleep at night as a manager, and we're making our team happy, because I know so many managers, man, they just don't sleep. They're stressed out. How do I make my team happy? How do we make sure we hit our goals? What can I do to be this inspiration, but also answer to my boss? And like, they're in a tough spot. I mean, I get it. Like being in a manager position's tough, especially if you have a manager of your, you know, of your own. And so I would say to just like give yourself a little bit of grace and give yourself an opportunity to take a breath and say, what is working and what is not working for me as a leader? Where do I feel this tug? Because let me give you this little news flash here. There's not one way to manage people. There's not one way to be a leader. And the best way to start being a better leader, it's just like you said, it starts with communication. One, listening and being aware of what your team is doing, but then two, making sure you have clear communication and expectations with your team.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it starts at the hiring and, you know, interview process. And I talk about the working genius a ton. And if this is your first episode ever and you've never heard of the working genius, it is like a personality assessment like Myers-Briggs or DISC or Strength Finders. Tons of companies use these types of assessments to place candidates in their business and to kind of just assess, you know, like what kind of experience are we going to have working with you. But what the working genius does on top of that is it tells you how to apply it and what to actually do with this information. And it's super, super simple. And had I had something like the working genius, I would have not applied for half of the jobs that I applied for. And I think it helped me realize what are my strengths. And we talked about this right before we hit record about how like I'm entertaining the idea of hiring out social media content creation and things like that, because that's not something I want to do. I don't want to do this tedious work, and that's just not something that gets me excited. Talking with people and uncovering their problems and helping them find solutions is something that I thrive in. And you could probably tell how passionate I am about this because I'm, you know, bringing out my auctioneering voice going right now. But you know, finding what you're strong at and what you're not strong at, and knowing how to delegate that or communicate it effectively. And we can do that same thing in the interview process. If we knew how to ask questions the right way, communicate these job descriptions in the right way, we can say, oh, your resume looks like you know how to do XYZ thing. But like you said, flip that paper over and say, what gets you excited? And you will be able to tell if they say marketing, advertising, sales, like there's an inflection in their voice. Like you can tell what gets them excited and break that down when they start saying things that get them excited. Say, okay, what part of sales, customer relationships, the drive, the hunger, whatever it is, and get them really excited and say, actually, that's not really what you're going to be doing in this position, but it is what you'd be doing in this position over here. So maybe you should actually be applying for that role. And so you're saving yourself, even though their resume was a perfect fit for the job you're hiring for, their skills and their passions actually align for the job in the next department. And so you're helping your customer or your potential prospect, you know, coming into the business in the right way, and you're setting your business up for success because you put the right people in the right place. So it just starts with that interview process and understanding how to ask really great questions, how to be a good leader and communicate effectively. Oh my gosh, I'm getting on the soapbox and getting like completely sidetracked. But this stuff,
hey, it's your podcast. That's
hours.
What's great about this. We can go so many different directions.
I know. I think if you've listened to this podcast more than once, you're probably like, this is typical Kacee stuff. But I get so passionate about this because it's so important. Like I know so many people who wanted to work in the ag industry because they grew up farming or ranching, or that's what their dad did. And so they wanted to be in the ag industry too. And then they get in and they are put in a position that didn't align with their skills or their passions, and they got burnt out. They had a bad experience, and then they wrote off the industry for good. And
Yeah.
I hate that. And I want to find a way to keep our industry alive and make it fun again. And I think it was the farm babe on her last episode where she's like, let's make farming sexy again. And I want to say, like, let's make the ag industry sexy again. Like, how do we make jobs in the agribusiness space fun? Not just solely focus on, oh, we have competition and the government's out to get us and we got this. You're going to have that in every single industry you go to. So let's look at the positive here. And when you start putting the right people in the right positions and you've got good leadership who supports that growth and that supports movements, even though they were really great at this position, support them if they want to move, because they're just going to be stuck in this position because they feel like they're letting you down or they don't feel like they're good enough. Like, support them. That's the best thing that you can do. And when we do that, we decrease the amount of burnout, we decrease the amount of turnover, and our industry thrives.
You listen, you said it right there. We're talking about managers and engagement and feeling a part of it. All of us seek this connection, right? And when clients come to me and they say, listen, I'm considering making a move, one of the first things I like to understand is why, right? Okay, talk to me about your situation. Why are you looking for something outside of where you are? And the common theme there is that they feel kind of a lack of connection, or they don't feel like there's this opportunity. And behind all that is that somewhere along the way, their manager has conveyed that. Because, I know a lot of times the manager and the people on both sides, and I'll ask them and they'll say, I had high hopes for this person, or I wanted this person to climb and I was going to put them here, here, and here. But the problem is if we as people don't hear it, we don't see it. It's not real. And so one of the things that we talk about when we work with young managers is that it doesn't have to be complicated, but just simply walking in and saying hello and making that daily connection, it makes people feel valued and they feel like they're a part of things. I can tell you that, earlier on in my career, I had a manager that I had to pass by my desk every single day, and I was this young guy and I wanted to climb, and I was so enthusiastic, and I would look up every day to say hello, and he would always look down and walk right by me. And that, even as I consider myself a guy's guy, that bothered me so much, because I would think, how can you've got, I relocated to live there. You've got this person that basically uprooted their life to be a part of your team, and you're not even willing to say hello. I cannot stress enough that one of the things we see is that a lot of young managers, they get so caught up in the day-to-day and the business of the business, right, that they forget about their people. And that's really where things start to go wrong. And so if you want to just keep it simple, but keep people feeling like they're valued, walk in and say hello. I encourage all the young managers at the facilities, walk your place at least once a day. If you can't do it once a day, maybe it's during harvest and things are busy, try to do it a couple times a week. Going out there and looking someone in the eye and having a 2-minute conversation can heal a whole lot of wounds. Right. It's
Wow.
amazing how people feel connected and how they feel like, as people, I think we tend to get down on ourselves, but when we have that recognition from our leaders, our managers, it starts to heal those wounds and that pain. And so I think that when we get that engagement and we hear directly from them about what's going on and we can bounce things off of them, it does a lot of healing. And so you might have an employee that you didn't even realize was considering leaving. And so when people come to me and say, hey, let's work on retention. How do we keep our people? We're losing 70% of our trainees in the first 2 years. What do we do? It's things like this. Just go out and strike up a conversation. You'd be amazed at the healing that can take place there. And also the information that you gather. You're going to be a better leader because you're tuned in. I had the chance to interview Mark Stewart, the CEO of AFA, when I was out at their leaders conference, and he said something that frankly I don't hear from a lot of CEOs, and this is not a knock on them, but more to praise him. He said that when he took over AFA, he realized that there were some issues there culturally, and he wanted to change it. And so when I asked him, well, what did you do? He said, I went person to person and I asked, what can we do better? What do you like? What don't you like? And although, it wasn't an overnight fix, that's how things started to change, by engaging and listening. And so, you talked about it here in our back and forth. When people don't feel like they have that connection, they start to look elsewhere. But when you go in and you look them in the eye, hey, how's it going? How are you feeling today? How's work treating you? What's new in your life? Something as simple as that can do so much good.
Wow. Yeah, I think that sometimes when you get put into a leadership position, you don't know how to act.
No, it's tough.
Right? If you've never been a manager, you've never led people or been a person that could influence others, you don't know how to do it. And
Right.
so you just kind of default to what you have seen done before, which is maybe what that guy that, you experienced of trying to say hi to them. And they just thought in order to look professional or in order to be this leader, they think that leadership meant power and had to represent a certain stereotype.
Right. Ruling with an iron fist. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought that's what leadership meant too. And Allie Robbins and I talked about this on her episode a couple, maybe 2 months ago. And we talked about leadership and how most people, unless you study it, unless you've taken some professional development about leadership development, you don't really know what leadership is.
Yes.
Most people think that leadership is I'm the top dog, I'm the loudest, I'm the most powerful, I'm in the front of the room, I'm the center of attention, I'm the person that everybody follows. Yeah. And that is just not true. Right. Leadership, one, can be done in any level, any position. And there's a book recommendation for you. It's called 360 Leadership by John Maxwell. And it talks about, it doesn't matter what role you play, even if you're the low man on the totem pole, you can show leadership and influence and impact others. So book recommendation there. But leadership is actually sometimes the person that one never gets credit and ensures that their team is seen and influenced and supported, and the leader is actually in the back of the room and behind the curtain encouraging their team on. And where I think a lot of people miss in not only leadership roles, I guess manager roles, because they're not leaders if they're not, you know what I mean? Like they're not in leadership if they're not leaders. And I think where they miss is that they think that they have to exude this pushiness or like this, like you said, kind of like that iron fist. And it's like, you don't have to be in a leadership position and be mean or cold or heartless. You can be so many other things. And there's not a cookie cutter, this is what leadership looks like, but just, being open-minded, having that communication, being willing to try something new and having that awareness of what's working, what's not working, what's our overall goal, and what adjustments do I need to make to not only my team, but the type of work or the type of communication I'm sending out to get that goal met. And I just don't think people understand what leadership is or anything like that. I think that's why it's so important to me to talk about our personal and our professional development together, because if you are in a leadership position or manager position, if you will, and you're not exempting or exuding leadership, it's a personal thing. It's showing me you have a lack of your own confidence, a lack of influencing people. So you think you have to show up this way in order to get stuff done. It could be a lack of so many other things, fear, rejection, not having an impact. Like to me, if you're showing up in a leadership position in that light, you have a ton of personal work you need to do.
I don't think that just anyone can lead, right? And I talk about this a lot. There's a huge difference between a manager and a leader. And I would say that, someone who considers himself a manager, who I would consider manager, is somebody that might manage the day-to-day, right? These are the details. Leaders are about vision. Leaders are about motivating you, showing you a vision. In the book I read by Daniel Harkavy, I was thinking 7 Perspectives of Effective Leaders. It talked about, a leader is not going to be in the plane, flying the plane in the cockpit, but they're going to be the runway lights, and they're going to show you, look, this is where you go, but you fly it in there and you get in there how you can. I think one of the issues is that it's how we promote leaders, and you brought it up. Very few people, at least in my entire career, I never took a leadership, seminar or work program workshop until after I'd already become a leader. When I was a leader in the ag for the first time, I went from being a merchandiser to a manager. My manager dropped me off and said, make money and don't get anybody hurt. Good luck. And then took off, and like, here I am, I didn't even get introduced to my people. And all of a sudden you're a leader. And one of the issues is that I think we have to look at companies is that how we promote people. Oftentimes we do it by default. Who's the next person up? Or, well, this person was really successful in their sales role, or maybe they were a great merchandiser, and so we automatically put them in a position of leadership. When many times the people in those, because they had that success, they're not good at leaders because they're better being focused on themselves. I can tell you in my career, I know a whole lot of traders who see things on a screen that I never saw, but they're terrible at leading people. And this is the thing that I try to tell people when they get put in a leadership position. That's because leadership is not about you. It's now beyond you. It's about your team. And so
Mhm.
the question I always ask when they say that there's problems with their team is, the first question I ask is, are you putting your people in position to win, to be successful? And number two, are you giving them the resources that they need to be successful? Again, because it's not about you. And so I think when you described it, when people see leadership as about them, that's when, they get kind of, they rule with an iron fist. A lot of times they're not willing to listen. And again, that's turning people off. The best leaders show that empathy. They have humility, that they realize they're able to ask others their opinion. And we get back to culture. If you want to talk about building an environment, in a culture, positive environment, that comes down to trust and people being feeling comfortable enough that they can speak their minds, even if it goes against the grain. I have sat there at some of the largest agribusinesses in the world, and I've sat in a boardroom and I've listened to things that I know I disagreed with, but I looked around and I saw my superiors weren't going to say anything, and so I didn't say anything. And we lose when we do things like that, right? I think about the moves that we made and how things backfired, and you think, all of us knew that this was headed for disaster. Why didn't we say anything? That's because you don't feel comfortable saying anything. So,
Mhm.
do you allow that environment, in your with your team? Do you allow them to speak up, even if it's different? Do you listen to other opinions? And I think that's where really strong leadership comes from. And again, that's why this all goes back to the whole communication piece and the leadership piece. It's all connected. And
Mhm.
with everyone out there searching for the holy grail and how do we find culture and leadership, and putting in popcorn machines and putting greens and ping pong tables at companies, it really starts with a conversation. And if you just start there, you're a whole lot closer to it than trying to buy your way into it.
So if somebody is listening to this and they've never led before, or maybe they're leading and they're finding it a lot more challenging than they have before, like what can they do? Like what's the first step? And my suggestion is decide right now that you want to be a better leader. I always encourage hiring a coach, whether it's myself, whether it's getting consulting from someone like you, whether it is working with Mark Jewell from my last podcast episode, and just making the decision to say, I'm willing to hear somebody else's perspective. Maybe you
Yeah.
don't go straight to your team, and you were talking about sitting at the table and having your superiors keep their mouths shut, knowing that you disagree or want to add something to that conversation. Like, what's the absolute worst thing that can happen? The absolute worst thing that can happen. Make that decision to say, you know what, I'm either willing to step up right here and right now, and if I say something that isn't received well, what's the worst thing that can happen? You get fired from a company that you weren't enjoying working for anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But I would say, like entertain the idea of hiring a coach, finding that mentor. I have a slew of personal and professional, resources that can help you with leadership, that can help you with your mindset. Maybe it's that scarcity mindset creeping in. And I'm not just talking about scarcity financially. I'm talking about scarcity of, what are people going to think? I don't have opportunities. I'm a victim. Like, I'll never be able to excel in XYZ area. It's held so many people back,
Yeah.
especially within the ag industry. And so I would say start there. And, AgriMinds is a fantastic program. I have a ton of people from every single level, whether it's management or, I work on the family farm part-time. So that way you're seeing the perspective of somebody else without the pressure of it being your team.
Mm.
Right. So you're able to hear from someone who may be in a similar position as somebody on your team, but you're not directly talking to them, but you're still gaining that experience, gaining their perspective, and that can help you too. So I highly encourage people to check out the AgriMinds group. The next group launches, the doors open February 1st. So you can visit kaceybull.com/AgriMinds to learn more and join the wait list there. But what other steps can you suggest for people who are like, where do I start? How do I know or evaluate? Am I a good leader? And what do I do next?
I think that's a great question. And getting your current reality is a really tough thing to do, because the problem with that is when we look in the mirror and it tells us who we really are, we have to deal with it, right? So a mistake a lot of managers make is they don't want to engage because if they hear things are messed up, then that means they have to fix them. So they choose to look the other way. But I would say that we have to do this with ourselves. You mentioned the 360. I'll never forget when I did my first 360 review. And basically what they did was they go around to some of your peers, your superiors, people that work for you, and they ask some very pointed questions, and it's all anonymous, right? So people are honest. And when I got that thing back and I opened it up, I'll never forget. I wanted to throw up because none of us like to hear that we're not perfect in every way. But I will say this, it probably also did more for me in telling me where I was and where my shortcomings were than I would have ever known otherwise. And with one of those things, it's kind of, you just got to rip the Band-Aid off and you have to have somebody tell you to your face, look, this is how it is. And so I would recommend somebody taking one of those. If you've got the guts, you can ask face to face, but I don't think people are going to be as honest to your face as they would otherwise. And so I would recommend if your company offers it, both the companies I worked for offered those 360 reviews. And I would recommend asking for something like that, right? Particularly if you're going to go in a leadership position, because that's going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And just for everybody who's freaking out now, there are good things in there as well, right? They don't just tell you you're horrible at everything. They're going to tell you, hey, look, Dustin might not be so great in this area, but he's really, really strong in this area. So there are things to build on there. But I think that's the key thing is knowing where you're at. And I would say that it starts with a conversation with your people. Once you figure that out, and I mean this, and working for the big companies that I did, we used to put on these surveys every year, and they were always kind of a joke because, truth be told, the employees knew that you ask the questions, but are you really going to do anything with the information once you get it? And as the manager, I would go to them and I would have this big sit down and I'd order pizzas and I'd say, okay, here's where you rated the company. And it was, like I said, it was kind of a joke because, truth be told, I might want to make some changes, but working for big companies, there's a lot of red tape and more than likely their immediate concerns are not going to be met. And so I would say that anytime you open yourself up and you try to engage with employees and you ask a real conversation about, listen, hey, Kacee, I want to be better. What can I do? Don't ask if you don't plan to take any action because you're going
Oh
to
yeah.
lose trust there. So if you really want to build this transparency and this trust, when you ask a question and Kacee says, Dustin, look, this is the way I see things. This is what I think you can do better or what I think you're good at. Take it to heart and listen. Again, it's not about your reaction or you disagreeing, but it's about this is their perspective. This is how they feel. And I think you have to be very intentional about seeking out that perspective. So as a manager, I would recommend this ties in great with right now year-end reviews, right? Nobody likes to do these things, and I hated to do them more than anyone, mostly because I thought it was a missed opportunity. If you were a young manager right now and you've had a horrible year and you feel absolutely disconnected from your team, do not miss this opportunity when you sit down as you go through your checklist. Save the last 5 minutes and ask your employee, hey, I have some questions for myself. How did I do? How did I interact with the team? Was I positive? Did I share information? Did I give you updates that you needed? Did you have the resources, the tools? Was I there for you? Did I address concerns? Ask those questions. You're going to be a better manager, but your employee is also going to feel that they made a better connection. Not saying that you're going to love what they have to say. And here's the hard part. You're going to have to practice keeping your opinions to yourself. Remember, it's not about your reaction. It's about that's how they feel. So you're going to have to internalize that and listen to it. Okay. Blowing up and disagreeing is not going to do anybody any good. So take the last 5 minutes and have that discussion, an honest discussion about you as a leader. So that's what I would recommend this time of the year right now. If you have a team, start there.
I was on maternity leave while I was having these year-end reviews. And so I still did them, but I didn't get my results back until I came back. And so it was March, April, something like that, where I got these results back. And part of me felt like crap because there were some people who were, Kacee's great at this. She has such a strength in this area. She does really great. And it was that 360 review. Yeah. And so I have no idea who said this. Now, I mean, I could kind of assume
we always try to figure out who
between one
said it,
or two people who said this.
I did the same.
But a couple of them followed me on social media. And so they saw that the majority of things I was posting about was not about my job. It was about my coaching business because that's what I wanted to promote on my social media. And there was no rule about it, And so I remember one review said, it doesn't feel like Kacee's heart is in this role. It seems like all she's worried about is promoting her business and growing her brand. And I initially felt a dagger to the heart because I did feel like I was showing up, but then part of me was like, they're right. My heart is not in this role. I'm torn. And that was the honest gut-wrenching truth I needed to hear to help me get clear on what my decision needed to be for my future. And so that ultimately led me to leaving that job and starting my business. So part of it really hurt, but
Yeah.
had I not gotten that and had that clarity on where is my heart really at, it's clearly not in this business. It's clearly not in this company. It's at home doing my own thing, finding a lifestyle that matches with this newborn that I have, and utilizing my skills and growing my business in this season of my life. As a leader, that is the best thing that you can do, is welcome that constructive
Yeah.
feedback and say,
Yeah.
you know what? I don't feel like I've shown up for you in the ways that you need. Help me understand what I can do differently to support you. Because like you
I
said,
think you're totally
leadership.
normal though, Kacee. I look, I want to say I felt the same way. So I think it's absolutely normal. And this is kind of, we're being vulnerable here a little bit. I'll never forget when I got mine back and had a lot of great things, but it said, Dustin is the one most likely to make a mistake in details. And at first you're like, oh, like, how could you say this
Yeah.
about me? But it made me look in the mirror and I said, you know what? You're right, because I'm a big picture guy. I'm 30,000 feet here and I don't get caught up in the little bitty day-to-day stuff, right? And that's true. But it also made me a better manager, because when there were some people that needed those details, I recognized that, okay, I wasn't sharing those details with you. And so I get
Yeah.
it. But at first, your first reaction is to feel hurt. But in the end,
Yeah.
when you can accept that and move on, it made you better. And clearly, look what it did for you. So as painful as it is to go through it, look where you are now versus where you were then. So
Mhm.
again, it's another positive example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when you're not honest, when you don't voice concerns, when you don't share struggles, you're hurting people.
For sure.
You're
For sure.
hurting them.
Yeah.
You have to be okay. Well, here's the thing though. There's a way to deliver.
Yeah. Yes,
There
it
is a
matters.
way to share that information and that's some of the work that I help clients with is I'm struggling in these areas, or I'm this manager and I don't know how to help my team. How do I do this? And we work on like, what's the replacement statement? Here's what you were originally going to say, but how can we rephrase this to not put them in the defense, to not hurt their feelings, but to say, I'm sharing this because I care about you. So what's the replacement statement? And so we do a lot of exercises. We even do this in AgriMinds, the program, of how can I ask for feedback, but ask for the feedback in a way that says, don't come at me and tell me all these things I suck at, but how can I be better?
Yeah, and that topic right there that you bring up, in my former life when I was leading a big team, that was actually such an issue of us with our young managers that we had to like do a workshop on it, because we realized that as good as they were at all these other things, and you're hiring, when you're in the merchandising, you're hiring these type A, I used to call it the AAA, aggressive, assertive ass kickers, right? They're very go get them. They can run through a wall and fire to win. But when it comes to delivering bad news, they really weren't very good at it. And the problem with that is when you're not giving feedback, the whole team starts to break down, because people assume that they're doing well and then they're not. And then you tell them they're bad and they get written up or they get fired. Everything breaks down because you weren't honest about it. And so that's something that a lot of young managers struggle with, is how to deliver that tough news. And so I think it's great that you brought that up, because there is a way to do it, right? How do I tell somebody that's been working here longer than I've been alive that, hey, you're not meeting expectations and that I really need more to you? And if you take, there's a new sheriff in town and you're a gunslinger, my way or the highway, well, pretty soon you're not going to have a crew. And then you're in really big trouble. And so delivery is really, really important. So what you said is spot on.
And I know that that's one of the areas of weaknesses that I have as a coach, is that sometimes I'm too constructive. Sometimes some people don't want to know what they're doing wrong. They are not ready to hear. They don't want growth at this time.
Yeah.
And so that's been a lot of the work that I've had to do over the last year, is how can I ask questions of why that somebody does something without them saying, well, why did you do that, in like a criticizing type of way? It's like more of what was the driven thing behind that.
Yeah,
And so
and there's
it's
an art
work.
to it. Yeah, there's an art to it, and that's one of the reasons why when we talk about, young leaders struggle, because they've never been given those rules or those examples. You're kind of
Rule,
thrown to the
yeah, and
wolves.
etiquette, leadership etiquette for
Right.
sure.
And that's why it's so important that we consider who we promote, because when you put someone at the next level and they're over a team, it's a huge decision because that's going to make or break your organization. Because they're going to follow their tone and their lead, and so that's why it's very important that we really think about it. And that's one of the things that when I'm working with companies that talk about retention is I like to ask, well, how do you decide who's promoted? Because it's such a big deal. Because the wrong decision can wipe out your entire team, and vice
Yeah.
versa. It can also elevate other people and bring out new people that you didn't even know had a certain skill set because they want to work for that leader. But it can also wipe everybody out. So you've got to be really, really careful about who we put in these positions. And I think that's probably one of the biggest changes that I've seen over the years is that from my generation coming out, and I graduated college in 1997, just to give you a frame of reference there. But when I came out, it was the person who had been there the longest, and they typically ruled with an iron fist, and they didn't take your feelings into account, and frankly didn't care. If you didn't like it, go find somewhere else. Again, it's a dawning of a new age. And if you want to attract top talent, we've got to be better. I know that was something that I listened to your with Mark Jewell, that he talked about how can we be better. That's something as an organization we need to be better. There's a better way to interview. There's a better way to lead. And I think he's right. And that was such a great episode. And I agree that we can do this better. And there's a better way that we keep our people coming back and then we can attract the top talent.
Yeah, and it is hard work. I mean, I talk about this every single day and I'm still learning. And, I quote John Maxwell quite a bit. There's no failing, only opportunity to be better. And, as much as I love this topic, I don't know how anyone can perfect it. And Zig Ziglar is a perfect example of that. Somebody, visited him while he was on his hospital bed and he was reading a self-help book. And they're like, what are you doing? Like, you're
You're right. You're almost
no
cashed
offense, but
out. Yeah.
you're about to kick the bucket here. What are you looking to improve,
Yeah.
And he's just like, if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I can be better. There's always something to learn. There's always something to do better. And there's always a way to show up in a way that serves somebody else in a new way. And so, man, we could we could talk about this all day long.
It's been a good discussion. Yeah.
I'm so thankful that you were able to be on the AgriMinds podcast, Dustin. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, work with you in Omni Ag Consulting, or just connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, listen, I appreciate it. It's been just a pleasure to be here too. And like you, I could talk about this all day long because I love trying to help people and organizations with this. But you could reach out to me at omni-ag.com. You could find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram under Omni Ag Consulting. But we love having these conversations. And whether you're an organization looking for talent or looking for ways to improve your team, or just someone that says, listen, hey, I think I need some help with a career planning or an interview or career fair, we love to give that kind of advice as well. So reach out anytime and we'll get a conversation started.
Sounds good. And I'll put some links in the show notes too, so that way they can connect with you. But
Sure.
Thank you again, Dustin, for being on and having such a great conversation with me today.
Great topic. I really enjoy being here. We're going to get you on to the Boot Pit to Boardroom as well. That's one thing I should plug, and we'll have you on there as a guest very, very soon.
Oh, yeah. I will put a link to that podcast as well. And there's been some really cool posts that he's shared about that on LinkedIn too. So make sure you follow Dustin on LinkedIn because he's always got some really cool content. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kacee.